This content is a work of fiction inspired by regional folklore, urban legends, cultural storytelling traditions, and anecdotal reports submitted online. While presented in a documentary narrative format for immersion and entertainment, no claims are made regarding the factual accuracy of the events described. Join the Red Sky Collective, subscribe, like, and activate notifications so you're among the first to receive our next classified case file.
What followed was a swift, terrifying escalation from visual anomaly to national security crisis. The sightings by Silva's crew quickly synchronized with alarming returns being logged simultaneously on the primary ground-based radar installations operated by the Brazilian Air Force, FAB. Multiple centers, Brasília, São Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro, began registering identical, overlapping anomalies. These were not faint, fleeting blips attributable to atmospheric inversion layers, spurious echoes, or weather balloons. These were solid, undeniable tracks consistent with large, highly reflective objects traveling at phenomenal, often impossible, speeds. The conflict was immediate and existential. The radar systems, calibrated and trusted instruments of national defense, were reporting things that simply could not exist according to the established parameters of aeronautical engineering and physics. The scale of the phenomenon rapidly expanded, intensifying the pressure on the military chain of command. The radar systems identified at least 21 distinct targets simultaneously occupying the airspace over the highly populated, critical economic corridor stretching from São Paulo up toward the coast and inland over Goiás. Air traffic controllers, initially stunned into disbelief, began meticulously recording the data, their voices growing strained and urgent as they communicated the impossible to their supervisors. The targets were tracked operating at altitudes ranging from 10,000 feet up to 33,000 feet, conventional cruising levels for jet traffic, creating an imminent risk of collision. Yet, these objects were not responding to any attempts at radio communication. They were silent, hostile, and utterly unresponsive. The objects displayed a terrifying mastery of kinetic maneuverability. Radar operators watched in stunned silence as the tracks demonstrated sudden, instantaneous changes in velocity, moving from stationary hovering to speeds estimated to be well in excess of Mach 10, a velocity that would instantly disintegrate any conventional aircraft structure and incinerate an organic pilot through G-forces alone. Furthermore, they exhibited the ability to instantaneously drop altitude or climb thousands of feet vertically without any discernible forward momentum, defying the inertial limitations of known physics. This was the core of the conflict. The tracking systems, which formed the bedrock of Brazilian air defense, were presenting irrefutable proof of technology that was not only unknown but appeared to render the nation's entire defensive doctrine obsolete. The escalating reports, backed by the testimony of Colonel Silva and the cold, empirical data pouring in from 3 separate radar sites, reached the highest echelons of the military establishment in Brasília. This was not a localized flap, nor the subjective reporting of a single bewildered pilot. This was an institutional event, officially logged and verified across multiple sensory platforms. The Minister of Aeronautics, Brigadier General Octavio Julio Moreira Lima, was alerted immediately. The decision had to be made instantly. Was the Brazilian Air Force prepared to confront an unknown threat operating with technological superiority, or were they to ignore what the instruments were declaring as a genuine incursion? The answer came quickly and decisively. In a chilling order that echoed across the command centers, General Lima authorized the immediate launch of the FAB's Quick Reaction Alert (QRA) forces. This was the defining moment that shifted the event from a peculiar sighting into a historical military engagement. The order was simple, direct, and unprecedented: scramble the jets. Intercept and identify the intruders. The fighters selected for the mission represented the sharp edge of the FAB's defensive capabilities: 3 Mirages 3E/BR interceptors stationed at Anápolis Air Base, ALA-2, and 2 F-5E Tiger II jets. These were the nation's premier assets, designed specifically for high-speed interception and engagement. Within minutes of the order being issued, the serene night air above the Air Force bases was torn by the explosive roar of afterburners igniting. The pilots, highly trained and rigorously professional, took to the skies under the extreme duress of an utterly unique mission. They were hunting objects that the standard military lexicon had no adequate designation for. They were hunting unidentified flying objects, UFOs, officially. As the pilots climbed rapidly towards their designated intercept sectors, the ground controllers provided continuous updates, their voices metallic and urgent over the radio channels. The Mirages, designed for speed, were quickly guided towards the areas of highest concentration of targets. The pilots were receiving vectors based on tracks visible on their onboard radar systems as well as the overarching guidance from the ground, confirming the presence of the elusive targets. The pilots confirmed their secondary objective, to achieve visual confirmation and, if possible, obtain photographic evidence of these phantom incursions. The answer came quickly and decisively. In a chilling order that echoed across the command centers, General Lima authorized the immediate launch of the FAB's Quick Reaction Alert (QRA) forces. This was the defining moment that shifted the event from a peculiar sighting into a historical military engagement. The order was simple, direct, and unprecedented: scramble the jets. Intercept and identify the intruders. The fighters selected for the mission represented the sharp edge of the FAB's defensive capabilities. 3 Mirages 3E/BR interceptors stationed at Annapolis Air Base, ALA-2, and 2 F-5E Tiger II jets. These were the nation's premier assets, designed specifically for high-speed interception and engagement. Within minutes of the order being issued, the serene night air above the Air Force bases was torn by the explosive roar of afterburners igniting. The pilots, highly trained and rigorously professional, took to the skies under the extreme duress of an utterly unique mission. They were hunting objects that the standard military lexicon had no adequate designation for. They were hunting unidentified flying objects, UFOs, officially. As the pilots climbed rapidly towards their designated intercept sectors, the ground controllers provided continuous updates, their voices metallic and urgent over the radio channels. The Mirages, designed for speed, were quickly guided towards the areas of highest concentration of targets. The pilots were receiving vectors based on tracks visible on their onboard radar systems as well as the overarching guidance from the ground, confirming the presence of the elusive targets. The pilots confirmed their secondary objective, to achieve visual confirmation and, if possible, obtain photographic evidence of these phantom incursions. The development phase of the incident was marked by rapidly escalating frustration and palpable fear within the cockpits. As the Mirages reached their intercept altitudes, the objects began exhibiting a strange, almost proactive evasion pattern. They were not merely flying randomly, they appeared to be reacting intelligently to the presence of the fighter jets. Whenever a Mirage pilot closed to within radar range and attempted to achieve a stable lock, the target would instantaneously break contact. The objects would accelerate rapidly, executing complex maneuvers that put them beyond the speed and turn limits of the Mirages, or simply extinguish their lights and vanish from the primary radar screens, only to reappear moments later on another sector of the controller's display, hundreds of kilometers away. This pattern interrupt, the objects demonstrated awareness of the interceptors and their ability to effortlessly evade sophisticated countermeasures, underscored the gravity of the situation. It was not a mechanical failure or an atmospheric fluke, it was an engagement with a technology capable of analyzing and neutralizing the threat posed by the FAB's premier fighter wing. One pilot, later identified as Captain Rodolfo, reported achieving radar lock on an object near the coastal city of Santos. Just as he was stabilizing the target for visual acquisition, the object executed a vertical ascent maneuver that controllers later estimated exceeded 30 times the gravitational tolerance of the human body, vanishing from the effective detection radius in a matter of seconds. The initial confusion soon morphed into a chilling realization among the military commanders: they were not chasing weather anomalies, they were being observed. The objects appeared to be toying with the Mirages and F-5s, demonstrating their overwhelming technological superiority without resorting to aggression. The targets would cluster together, forming tight formations visible both visually and on radar, only to instantly disperse and scatter when the jets approached too closely. The sheer density of the data collected during this brief but intense period was staggering. Ground radar operators logged the objects exhibiting speeds that, in some instances, pushed the limits of the military's tracking software. Altitude changes occurred so rapidly that the rate of climb was mathematically inconsistent with any known propulsion system. Furthermore, witnesses, including highly trained professionals, noted the distinctive luminous signature of the objects, a pure, intense white or blue light, often described as possessing a non-thermal, cold glow, inconsistent with combustion-based propulsion. The intense pursuit continued for several hours, well into the deep hours of the tropical night. The Mirages and F-5s, limited by fuel reserves, were forced to land and refuel, only to be immediately scrambled again in a desperate, relentless hunt. The Minister of Aeronautics maintained constant contact with the DCA and the pilots themselves, recognizing that every minute provided vital, albeit terrifying, empirical data. The entire Operational Air Defense Command was focused exclusively on this single, unprecedented event. The climax of this initial phase of the incident occurred when a cluster of objects, having seemingly exhausted their game of cat and mouse, massed together and began a coordinated, high-speed retreat. Radar screens across the region showed the targets accelerating out of the effective range of the Brazilian Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. They departed with the same impossible speed and silence with which they had arrived, leaving behind a baffled, exhausted, and fundamentally altered military command structure. The jets returned to base, their highly trained pilots carrying logs filled not with conclusive identification, but with stunning, unprecedented accounts of objects defying every law of motion and aerodynamics. The official logs of the FAB, detailing the interception attempts, the radar data, and the deployment of the nation's premier fighter fleet against a silent, unseen foe, were immediately classified at the highest level. The implications were too profound for immediate public dissemination. Brazil had officially engaged the unexplained, and the unexplained had effortlessly slipped away. The payoff was immediate, irrefutable institutional proof of advanced, non-terrestrial technology operating freely within national sovereign airspace. This night, the official UFO Night, served as a catastrophic confirmation that the skies above Brazil harbored visitors who were not merely passing through but were actively engaging with and observing military responses. The military machine of the nation had been activated, its best resources deployed, and it had failed to even capture a definitive image of the intruders. The immediate necessity now shifted from interception to explanation, demanding answers to critical questions that shook the very foundations of scientific and defense orthodoxies. The logs, the radar tapes, and the pilot transcripts, the cold, hard evidence generated during those intense hours, were now secured, awaiting analysis. The world was about to learn, officially and undeniably, that Brazil had scrambled its fighter jets against UFOs. In the next part of this unfolding investigation, we will delve into the extraordinary public response and the incredible documents that leaked to the press, including the verbatim audio transcripts of the panicked, yet professional, communications between the fighter pilots and the air traffic control towers, providing an intimate, chilling glimpse into the fear and confusion of facing an absolute unknown. The initial frenzy of the scramble, characterized by the roaring ascent of the Northrop F-5E Tiger IIs and the sleek, supersonic dash of the Dassault Mirage 3 EBRs, gave way almost immediately to a chilling operational reality. The Brazilian Air Force was pursuing phantoms that defied the very physics underpinning modern aviation. The targets, initially identified as 12 distinct points of light traversing the airspace over 3 Brazilian states, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Goiás, were not simply fast, they were maneuvering with an agility and intent that rendered the world's most sophisticated interceptors obsolete in real time. At CINDACTA I, the nerve center of Brazilian air defense located in Brasília, the atmosphere was a volatile mix of panicked confusion and rigid military discipline. Radar technicians, seasoned veterans accustomed to tracking everything from slow-moving commercial airliners to the fleeting signature of clandestine drug flights, found their screens displaying data that was, quite frankly, nonsensical. The targets, solid, distinct contacts registered on multiple independent radar systems, including the ground-based primary and secondary surveillance radars, possessed the ability to decelerate from speeds estimated conservatively at Mach 15, approximately 11,500 miles per hour, to a dead stop in virtually 0 seconds, holding stationary at altitudes ranging from 5,000 to 30,000 feet, only to instantaneously accelerate back into hypervelocity streaks across the cathode ray tube. Major Flavio de Lima, the duty officer overseeing the chaotic scene, repeatedly demanded confirmation of the calibration. Were these atmospheric returns? Were they interference from nearby weather systems or sophisticated electronic countermeasures, ECM, deployed by a foreign power? The technical analysis was unequivocal. The returns were consistent with solid, metallic objects of considerable size, roughly the size of a standard commercial jetliner, yet lacking any detectable transponder signature or IFF, identification friend or foe, signal. The key differentiator, however, was their impossible thermodynamic behavior. An object decelerating from Mach 15 would instantly vaporize due to friction and the resultant thermal shock. The G-forces alone would crush any known airframe. Yet, these contacts remained crisp, solid, and entirely unaffected. The complexity was compounded by the object's tactical awareness. Moments after the F-5ES from Santa Cruz Air Base were airborne, vectored aggressively toward the nearest radar clusters northeast of São José dos Campos, the targets exhibited a synchronized evasion pattern. They did not simply flee, they executed complex, three-dimensional maneuvers that seemed specifically designed to break the radar lock of the pursuing jets. One cluster of four objects, previously moving cohesively, separated into disparate trajectories, each vectoring orthogonally, turning a perfect 90 degrees, while maintaining impossible speeds. This suggested not random behavior, but controlled, intelligent flight dynamics far beyond human capability. Up in the cramped cockpit of the interceptors, the situation transitioned rapidly from high adrenaline chase to sheer frustration. Pilot reports flowed back to CINDACTA I, painting a picture of technological humiliation. The highly advanced fire control radars of the F-5ES, designed to acquire and lock onto supersonic enemy aircraft, struggled mightily. The sophisticated Doppler systems, which use frequency shifts to measure velocity, registered fluctuations so extreme that the computer systems briefly believed they were experiencing equipment failure. The pilots were under immense pressure, navigating the dark Brazilian night sky, reliant entirely on the instructions relayed from the ground. They were told the targets were immediately ahead, at their 12 o'clock position, rapidly closing the distance. However, just as the pilot would initiate the final radar acquisition sequence, often requiring a steep, physically taxing climb or dive, the targets would simply disappear from the scope. Not gradually fading, but vanishing, only to reappear hundreds of miles away, simultaneously, on another radar system operating independently. One particularly harrowing report came from a pilot tracking a single, persistent target over the state of Goiás. The pilot, maintaining full afterburner, was attempting to close the vast distance. The ground controller, his voice strained, informed the pilot that the target had now dropped from 30,000 feet to below 5,000 feet in an estimated 2 seconds. The pilot responded with disbelief, knowing that such a dive would exceed the structural limits of his own robust airframe by a factor of 10, tearing the wings clean off. Yet, the ground radar confirmed the target was now skimming the lower atmosphere, exhibiting what appeared to be slow, deliberate movement, almost as if taunting the high-speed interceptor. The immediate implications of these maneuvers were catastrophic for the Air Force's operational understanding. If these were enemy aircraft from a hostile nation, that nation possessed propulsion and material science capabilities that rewrote the laws of thermodynamics and inertia. If this was true, Brazil, and by extension, the rest of the world, was strategically blind and defenseless. The political fallout alone would trigger an immediate, irreversible global security crisis. The objects, seemingly aware of the operational limitations of their pursuers, began to exhibit more brazen behavior. In an incident reported by multiple radar installations and subsequently corroborated by at least one of the airborne pilots, a single object, momentarily visible as an intensely luminous point of light, described by the pilot as a bright orange star with no trailing exhaust, maneuvered directly in front of the jet. The pilot attempted to achieve visual identification, a mandatory protocol before any engagement could be considered, but the object accelerated so violently that the jet's proximity alarm blared instantly, suggesting a near collision. The subsequent wake turbulence was zero, confirming that the object possessed no visible means of aerodynamic lift or propulsion, such as wings or jet exhausts, further deepening the puzzle. The pattern interrupts in the pursuit were not merely frustrating, they suggested intelligence testing the operational envelope of the interceptors. For instance, after the 3 Mirage fighters from Anápolis were vectored into the airspace north of Rio de Janeiro, tracking 3 separate contacts, the targets executed what appeared to be a defensive shield formation. They maintained perfect geometric spacing relative to each other, moving in unison as if linked by an unseen cord, forcing the Mirages, which relied on speed and distance for interception, to break formation to avoid potential friendly fire or mid-air collision. As soon as the Mirages separated, the 3 objects immediately scattered, only to regroup minutes later over a different sector, presenting the same perfectly triangular formation. The consumption of fuel became a critical factor. The F-5ES, burning through high-octane jet fuel at an alarming rate during sustained afterburner use, were nearing their minimum fuel return to base (MFRTB) threshold. The pilots, their bodies aching from the G-loads imposed by constant high-speed maneuvering ordered by the ground controllers, reported exhaustion and a growing sense of futility. They were locked in a chess match where the opponent knew every move they were capable of making and had access to powers far beyond their own. At CINDACTA I, General Socrates, having been immediately awakened and brought to the operations floor, watched the radar screens with mounting dread. The general was now communicating directly with the Minister of Aeronautics. The pressure was enormous, the airspace was officially closed, civilian flights were being diverted, and the entire high command of the Brazilian military was on high alert, demanding explanations that simply did not exist. The standard military lexicon, the classification system used to identify unknown contacts, had been exhausted. They were not balloons, weather anomalies, or known aircraft. They were clearly hostile, or at the very least, non-cooperative entities penetrating sovereign airspace at will. General Socrates issued a directive that underscored the gravity of the situation. Every single piece of radar film, every audio recording, and every handwritten log was to be meticulously preserved and immediately classified top secret, indefinitely. The official narrative, should any information leak, and leaks were already proving inevitable given the scale of the event, would need careful construction. But first, they had to determine if the threat was escalating. The objects, sensing the fighter jets were running low on endurance, appeared to increase their mocking display. One massive contact, which had remained largely static over the city of São Paulo for 30 minutes, began to pulse rapidly. Radar technicians noted an unprecedented fluctuation in its signature. It seemed to be briefly multiplying on the screen before snapping back into a single, solid mass. This phenomenon hinted at technologies capable of generating instantaneous cloaking or manipulating ambient light and radiation at the atomic level, capabilities that pushed the limits of theoretical physics into the realm of the truly inexplicable. The interceptors were now cycling back to base to refuel, leaving temporary, vulnerable gaps in the air defense coverage. As the first F-5E landed, its pilot, visibly shaken, confirmed a late-stage visual acquisition before descending. The object was not a conventional vehicle. It was characterized by an indescribable, metallic sheen, lacking rivets, seams, or visible propulsion, perfectly spherical or disc-shaped, and exhibiting a subtle, yet powerful, light source that seemed to generate its own aura rather than reflecting external light. The pilot stressed the complete absence of noise, even during its hypervelocity movements, a profound impossibility for any atmospheric flight. The crucial next phase of the operation was initiated as fresh jets were fueled and armed. The command shifted from mere interception and identification to aggressive pursuit and attempt at forced landing. The Minister of Aeronautics, recognizing the existential threat posed by these untouchable aerial entities, issued a restricted mandate, pressed the pursuit to the maximum extent of the pilot's endurance, prioritizing capture or forced descent over simple observation. The next wave of fighters taking off were carrying live ordnance. The official UFO Night was about to move from a high-speed chase to a potentially violent, international incident, carried out in the deep, anxious silence of the Brazilian night sky. The stage was set for a confrontation, but the operational parameters were entirely unknown, dictated by the impossible movements of the invaders. The world's most advanced air defense system was chasing ghosts, and the ghosts were clearly enjoying the game. The truth of what occurred in the final hours of May 19, 1986, was only beginning to unfold, shrouded in vapor trails and the technical impossibility of the unknown. The situation escalated from a controlled, if baffling, military exercise into an unprecedented saturation event across the Brazilian southeastern airspace, pushing the established protocols of the Brazilian Air Force, or FAB, far beyond their designed operational limits. The initial deployment of the F-5E Tiger II and the subsequent launch of the Mirage were mere appetizers to the logistical and perceptual feast that was unfolding in real time within the highly secure confines of the Air Defense and Air Traffic Control Integrated Center, known by its acronym, CINDACTA. Ground control operators, already working under extreme stress, watched their radar screens populate with contacts that defied conventional understanding of physics and aeronautical engineering, multiplying the difficulty exponentially as the hours progressed. The testimony of Captain Viana, meticulously logged and preserved within the FAB archives, offered a chilling narrative of pursuit and psychological strain. He was not chasing a single, defined target, but a fluid, polymorphic entity. Viana described the objects, when visually acquired, not merely as bright lights, but as having a distinctly geometric form, appearing sometimes cylindrical, sometimes square, often accompanied by a pulsing, deep red or orange glow that seemed entirely divorced from the usual incandescent light signatures of flares or high-altitude meteorological balloons. Critically, these objects performed feats of kinetic energy deployment that no known manned or unmanned vehicle of 1986 could tolerate. During one particular sequence, documented meticulously by the ground radar tracking systems, one object, initially hovering silently at approximately 15,000 feet, executed a horizontal acceleration that Viana estimated, based on his relative speed of Mach 0.9, to be instantaneously achieving speeds potentially exceeding Mach 5. This instantaneous vector change and acceleration, the very essence of the technological mystery, introduced a severe conflict between the empirical data gathered by the state-of-the-art radar systems and the limited human perception of the pilots. The ground radar, benefiting from sophisticated signal processing, registered solid, metallic echoes, contacts with the structural integrity and reflective cross-section typical of large aircraft, perhaps even a transport plane. Yet, the objects visually seen by the pilots were small, silent, and emitted no detectable thermal signature indicative of conventional propulsion, such as jet exhaust or rocket plume. The discrepancy was professionally and academically agonizing for the senior officers reviewing the telemetry. How could a small, visually observed light source generate a radar return equivalent to a massive, conventional aircraft? The only rational military conclusion, however unsettling, was that the objects were utilizing some form of cloaking or counter-radar technology, or, more simply and terrifyingly, they were constructed of materials and powered by systems entirely unknown to terrestrial science. The geographical scope of the incident expanded rapidly beyond the skies immediately adjacent to São José dos Campos. As the initial flight crews reached their minimum fuel states and were forced to break off pursuit and return to base, new contacts began to emerge hundreds of kilometers away. Reports poured into CINDACTA and the Brasília Command Center from air traffic control towers in Rio de Janeiro, specifically near the crucial Galeão International Airport, and from remote defense stations stretching into Minas Gerais and even briefly brushing the air defense sectors over the central western plains. The phenomenon was not localized, it was systemic. At one point, confirmed by multiple independent radar installations, the number of simultaneous tracked contacts reached an astonishing 21. These were not random clusters of disorganized activity, they appeared, upon retrospective analysis of the flight paths, to maintain coherent formation patterns and exhibit synchronized maneuvers. The pursuit undertaken by Lieutenant Mirage, piloting the Mirage provided perhaps the most unsettling data point of the night. Tasked with intercepting the faster-moving objects detected at higher altitudes, Mirage found himself locked in a high-speed chase against an entity that treated his own Mach-capable interceptor as if it were stationary. His mission involved a sustained climb to an altitude nearing 40,000 feet, where the air thins and the performance envelope of the Mirage approaches its structural limit. Mireless's account detailed how the object, which he identified visually as having a distinct, luminous disk appearance, moved from being a distant point on his radar to directly overhead in a matter of seconds. When he attempted to lock his fire control radar onto the target, a standard procedure for identification and threat assessment, the object seemed to anticipate the action. According to the internal flight recorder, the radar lock was instantaneously broken as the object executed a vertical ascent maneuver that defied the known limits of G-force tolerance. If a conventional aircraft were to climb from 40,000 feet to, say, 70,000 feet in the time frame observed, estimated to be less than 8 seconds, the required instantaneous vertical acceleration would expose the airframe and any hypothetical biological occupants to forces measured in hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Gs. Such forces would instantly crush metal and liquefy human tissue. The conclusion, shared by the flight engineers and structural analysts, was inescapable. These were either unmanned, remotely operated probes, or the physics governing their motion adhered to an entirely different set of rules than those governing standard atmospheric flight. The engineering challenge alone served to eliminate every conventional explanation previously proposed, including experimental aircraft from foreign powers. No earthbound power possessed technology capable of resisting such forces. The intensity of the radio communications between the pilots and ground control during this period became a centerpiece of the subsequent classified investigation. The audio tapes captured the growing exasperation, the disbelief, and finally, the quiet professional fear of the pilots. In the sterile, clipped language of military aviation, the frustration was palpable. Calls like, "Target is accelerating away from me, breaking contact," were replaced by, "It's playing games with us, center. It has reversed its vector 180 degrees without turning," and the profoundly disturbing, "I have visual contact, but the radar is now clean. The target is sitting motionless and is simply observing my approach." This suggested not merely advanced technology, but intent. The objects were not passive atmospheric phenomena, they were actively maneuvering, avoiding engagement, and seemingly analyzing the capabilities and limitations of the Brazilian interception force. In Brasília, the command center was in turmoil. Air Minister Octavio Moreira Lima Socrates, the official highest authority overseeing the incident, found himself in a completely untenable political and military situation. The standard playbook for unidentified aircraft, be they hostile military intruders, rogue civilian planes, or even false radar echoes, had been exhausted. He was receiving confirmed, multiple source reports of craft that could not exist, being chased by the best assets the nation possessed. The critical decision was made to keep the operation isolated and internal, preventing media leaks that would surely cause widespread panic. Yet, maintaining the secret was becoming geometrically harder as more bases were placed on high alert and more personnel, from maintenance crews to radar technicians, to refueling specialists, became aware that something truly extraordinary was happening in the skies of Brazil. The minister, acting under immense pressure and fully aware of the international implications should a Soviet or American source claim responsibility for such advanced craft, issued increasingly urgent directives: pursue until minimum fuel, but do not fire unless fired upon. The dilemma was profound. The objects were clearly invading sovereign airspace, yet their technological superiority rendered any attempt at conventional engagement moot, and any hostile act could potentially trigger an international incident or, worse, provoke an unknown power capable of unprecedented military capability. The incident reached its peak around midnight, local time, with the final, dramatic engagement involving the last pair of operational fighters airborne over the massive expanse of the air defense zone. As the pilots reported dropping towards their absolute minimum fuel state, the point where remaining airborne is a greater risk than landing, the objects performed their ultimate, coordinated vanishing act. The radar screens at CINDACTA had been saturated for hours, showing contacts flitting across the scope like digital flies, making sharp turns, merging, separating, and defying all established identification protocols. Suddenly, in a timeframe measurable in milliseconds, the chaos dissolved into silence. One by one, the 21 objects, confirmed seconds earlier by primary and secondary radar systems across several states, vanished. Not gradually fading due to distance, not decelerating and disappearing below the radar horizon, but simply ceasing to exist as observable contacts. The ground controllers, exhausted and emotionally drained, watched the screens return to the comforting, mundane clutter of commercial traffic and benign weather echoes. The silence that descended upon the radio frequencies was heavier than the continuous roar of jet engines. It signaled the end of the chase, but emphatically not the end of the mystery. The pilots, returning to base with nearly empty tanks, could only relay accounts of frustration and awe. They had been effectively outmaneuvered, not by a conventional adversary, but by a fleet of non-conventional craft that appeared to treat the planet's atmosphere as their own personal playground. The data collected during these critical hours, the hard evidence of radar tracking, the photographic evidence, albeit limited by the speed and darkness, and the professional testimonies of elite FAB pilots, would later form the basis of the official military report, Operation Plate, or Opera Cayo Prado, detailing an event that could not be explained away by weather balloons, temperature inversions, or mass hallucination. The sheer density of physical evidence and the professional integrity of the witnesses precluded any simple dismissal. The Brazilian Air Force had engaged, albeit unsuccessfully, with the impossible, and now, in the early hours of May 20, 1986, the military command faced the agonizing task of explaining this unprecedented, technologically overwhelming close encounter to a government and a public that remained entirely unaware of the dramatic nocturnal pursuit that had just transpired over their heads. The question was no longer if they were real, but what they were, and perhaps more pressingly for the military establishment, why they had chosen the airspace of Brazil for their extensive and provocative demonstration of technological superiority. The true internal reckoning was about to begin. The moment of truth, the culmination of 2 hours of frantic aerial chase across the São Paulo airspace, was not marked by interception or destruction, but by a sudden, brutal realization of utter helplessness. Captain Gerson, the last of the interceptors still possessing enough fuel and strategic position to attempt a meaningful engagement, saw the impossible geometry unfold directly ahead of his Mirage. The object, which had maintained a perfect parallel track at approximately 15,000 feet, performed a maneuver that defied every known principle of aerodynamics and inertial physics. It did not slow down to turn, it simply pivoted. A swift, instantaneous change of direction, a 90-degree lateral shift followed immediately by a vertical climb rate that vanished off the top of his radar scope in a matter of heartbeats. The acceleration involved would have pulverized any biological entity inside the craft, yet the object executed the movement with an indifferent precision that chilled the pilot more than any perceived threat of collision. Gerson keyed his microphone, his voice a strained whisper over the encrypted channel, reporting the impossible divergence to CINDACTA I. The radar operators on the ground confirmed the sighting. The primary object had ascended so rapidly it transitioned from a distinct, tracked target to a fast-moving blur, quickly merging with the noise floor of the upper atmosphere, effectively erasing itself from the Brazilian skies in less than 30 seconds. For the pilots, this was the definitive closure, the confirmation that whatever they were pursuing was operating under a completely different set of physical laws, rendering their advanced fighter jets nothing more than cumbersome, earthbound toys. They were chasing ghosts that could turn solid and then dissolve into the ether at will. With fuel reserves critically low, the order finally came down from Brasília: stand down. Return to base. The air traffic control centers returned to a state of stunned silence, the frantic chatter replaced by the heavy breathing of controllers attempting to process the logs of the most surreal air operation in the nation's history. The jets returned sequentially to Anápolis and Santa Cruz, the pilots landing their sophisticated machines not with the adrenaline of combat victory, but with the stunned, disbelieving exhaustion of men who had stared directly into the void and watched the rules of reality bend. The immediate aftermath was swift and focused. Upon landing, the pilots were not congratulated, they were sequestered. Military protocol immediately categorized the incident as highly sensitive, bordering on classified. Each pilot, Gerson, Ferreira, Sergio, and the others involved in the primary observation chain, was subjected to intense, prolonged debriefings conducted by senior Air Force intelligence officers. They meticulously recounted every detail, the color, the shape, often described as multifaceted, like a polished orange or a distorted sphere, the movement patterns, the observed speed differentials, and the baffling radar signatures. These testimonies, captured on high-security audio and written transcripts, formed the bedrock of the official investigation that would follow. The Air Force seized all relevant tapes, the radar recordings from CINDACTA I, the cockpit voice recorders, CVRs, and the gun camera footage, although the pilots consistently reported that the objects remained just outside the optimal range for clear visual confirmation via the limited optical systems of the time. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of military personnel, across multiple platforms, had observed definite, physical objects exhibiting intelligent control and superior technology. The political implications, however, were unavoidable and immediate. This was not a vague anecdote from a peripheral civilian source, this was a national security event involving the highest levels of military response. Brigadier General José Carlos de Rezende, commander of the Brazilian air defense system, found himself facing an unprecedented dilemma. Acknowledging the event publicly would mean admitting that sovereign Brazilian airspace was penetrated by unknown technology the nation could neither identify nor defend against. Denying it would be impossible, given the dozens of witnesses, the scrambled jets, and the inevitable leakage of information through the highly populated control towers. The ultimate decision was made at the highest echelons of the military government, then still transitioning from military rule, under the purview of Air Force Minister Brigadier General Octavio Moreira Lima. The following day, May 20, 1986, Moreira Lima stepped before the National Press Corps in a moment that would forever define the legacy of the official UFO night. It was a press conference unlike any other, establishing a unique benchmark in the history of government engagement with the UFO phenomenon worldwide. Moreira Lima, flanked by stern-faced military officials, confirmed everything. In a sober, highly formalized statement broadcast nationally, he publicly acknowledged that something real and physical had indeed been tracked by multiple ground radars and subsequently intercepted by official Brazilian Air Force fighter jets. He confirmed that the objects were operating outside the known technological capabilities of Brazil or any other nation they possessed intelligence on. "We cannot deny the events," the minister stated, his words echoing through the halls of military history. "We tracked 21 objects on radar. We had our interceptors fly after them. The conclusions are that they are solid and, for operational reasons, we cannot specify what their origin or mission is. The Air Force has no technological explanation for what occurred." This confirmation was the climax of the political and journalistic drama. It was not a leaked document or a whistleblower testimony, it was the head of a major national defense apparatus admitting, on the record, to an encounter with unknown, superior aerospace technology. This admission, however, was simultaneously the final official word and the beginning of the cover-up, or more accurately, the official compartmentalization. The ministry could confirm the presence of the objects, but they could not, and would not, offer further speculation on their origin. The subject was deemed militarily investigated and closed, filed under phenomenon of unknown origin. The military's official internal report, though initially heavily restricted, eventually saw the light of day years later, solidifying the event's details. Often referred to by researchers as the Salsinha Report, after the officer who compiled much of the data, this document meticulously summarized the technical data. It highlighted the object's phenomenal speed, fluctuating wildly between 250 km per hour and an estimated 1,500 km per hour, and their ability to execute maneuvers with negative g-forces, zero inertia, a hallmark of propulsion systems radically different from jet or rocket engines. The report detailed the way the objects would lock on to the interceptor's radar signals only to instantly vanish, suggesting advanced electronic countermeasures or stealth capabilities far beyond the scope of 1980s technology. The technical data confirmed the objects were physical, yet exhibited behavior that violated established aerodynamic limitations. In the years that followed, the legacy of the official UFO night became a complex tapestry woven with undeniable facts and governmental obfuscation. The pilots, particularly those who spoke out later, recounted the psychological pressure they faced. They were instructed not to discuss the mission publicly, yet they carried the indelible memory of the chase. Many expressed frustration that their experience, validated by official military inquiry, was often dismissed by mainstream media as sensationalism, even after the minister's own confession. The event fundamentally changed the landscape of Brazilian ufology. It provided undeniable proof that the government had taken the phenomenon seriously enough to commit military assets. It placed the 1986 incident alongside other major Brazilian official investigations, such as the infamous Operação Prato, Operation Plate, an earlier military investigation from the late 1970s involving UFO sightings in the Amazon, proving a continuous, high-level concern regarding unidentified aerial phenomena. Researchers pointed to the sheer density of the official evidence, a mountain of radar plots, audio tapes, and formal military testimonies, as evidence that surpassed almost every other major UFO case globally in terms of institutional validation. Yet, despite the definitive nature of the military's own confirmation, the ultimate question remains unanswered: what were those objects? The Air Force investigation concluded exactly where it began: objects of unknown origin. No debris was recovered. No transmissions were decoded. The objects simply appeared, dominated Brazilian airspace for several hours, forced the mobilization of the national air defense system, and then disappeared as effortlessly as they arrived. The 1986 official UFO Night serves as a profound historical marker. It is a stark reminder that in the cold, logical world of military defense and advanced radar technology, reality occasionally intersects with the truly inexplicable. It was the moment a major global power officially conceded that not only are there things in the skies that defy our understanding, but those things are capable of outmaneuvering our most sophisticated defense mechanisms at will. The jets returned to base, the pilots were debriefed, and the minister issued his carefully worded statement, but the mystery was not solved, it was merely confirmed. It remains one of the most thoroughly documented and officially verified aerial incursions in human history, a night when Brazil's best pilots chased lights that moved like consciousness itself, a pursuit that ended not in a bang, but in the deafening silence of an unanswered question hanging forever over the vast, darkening canvas of the South American sky. The enduring silence on the true nature of the objects necessitates a deeper examination of the long-term records. The official government documents related to the 1986 incident, partially declassified and released over the past 2 decades, are a crucial repository of facts, yet they are often overlooked in favor of anecdotal accounts. I encourage all serious investigators and historians of the unexplained to seek out and scrutinize the primary documentation, the radar logs, the technical analyses, and the pilot transcripts, to fully grasp the magnitude of the May 1986 air battle, which remains, to this day, the definitive moment when a major nation's government publicly admitted its confrontation with technology from beyond. The full truth of the UFO night of 1986 is embedded within those military files, waiting to be properly understood.